There is a drawer in your home that I already know about. You don't have to admit it out loud. It exists somewhere. Maybe it's in the kitchen. Maybe it's in the hallway. Maybe it has achieved a kind of legendary status among people who visited your house. It contains 3 dead batteries you are absolutely not throwing away, because what if one of them has a little left? A phone charger for a phone you no longer own. A tape measure from 2009. A packet of soy sauce. Some keys to a lock that has not existed since the Obama administration. And approximately 40 twist ties in case the twist tie famine finally hits. You have almost certainly looked into this drawer in the past 6 months, thought I really need to sort this out, closed it again, and done absolutely nothing. Here is what I want to tell you today. You are not lazy. You are not disorganized. You are not broken in some minor but persistent domestic way. What you are doing, every single time you look at a dead battery and think, I'll keep it just in case, is executing a survival algorithm that kept your ancestors alive for approximately 2 million years. It is running perfectly. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The only problem is it was designed for an environment that no longer exists. It was built for a world where throwing something away could literally get you killed. And today, it expresses itself in your inability to discard a free pen from a hotel you stayed at in 2017. That pen has never worked. You know it has never worked. You keep it anyway. Stick with me through this one, because we're going to dig into the actual archaeology of ancient human storage, explain why your brain physically registers throwing things away as a loss equivalent to physical pain, visit some animals who make your junk drawer look positively minimalist, and by the end you're going to feel something you probably weren't expecting, deeply, strangely validated. There is something almost heroic about your inability to let go. Stay with me. Let's go back. Not 100 years, not even 1,000 years. Let's go back to the environment that actually built the brain you are currently using to watch this video. Imagine you are a human somewhere in the European interior. It's roughly 20,000 years ago, deep in the last glacial maximum, which is the technical term for when the Ice Age decided it was really going to commit to the bit. Temperatures across what is now France and Germany are 10 to 15 degrees Celsius colder than today. The steppe that stretches in every direction is vast, dry, and wind-hammered. There are woolly mammoths. There are cave bears. There are woolly wimmoths that last 8 months and could kill you in a matter of days if the wrong thing goes wrong. You live in a small group, maybe 20 to 30 people. Your food supply is not a grocery store. It is not a restaurant. It is not a guy named Dave who delivers to your door in a branded paper bag. Your food supply is the landscape, and the landscape is not reliable, and nothing, absolutely nothing about your survival is guaranteed. The caloric calculations you have to run, consciously or unconsciously, every single day are brutal. Too little food stored going into winter and people die. A tool breaks at the wrong moment and a hunt fails. A spear point shatters and suddenly there is no backup. Here's the thing about that world. It had no surplus. It had no overstock. It had no end-of-season clearance event where you could replace what you lost. Every object that existed in your life, every tool, every piece of fur, every scrap of material had to be either made by hand or found in an environment that frequently did not cooperate. The cost of losing something was not inconvenience. The cost of losing something was the time and energy it took to replace it, multiplied by the very real possibility that you might not survive long enough to do that replacing. In that world, and I want you to really sit with this, a person who held on to things, who kept the slightly worn scraper alongside the new one, who stored more than they thought they needed, who felt a genuine visceral reluctance to discard anything that might conceivably have future utility. That person was not a hoarder. That person was operating at an elite level of survival cognition. That person was, by the standards of their environment, very good at being alive. And they were not alone in figuring this out. One of the things that makes me deeply suspicious of the idea that hoarding is some uniquely human dysfunction is how many other animals arrived at the exact same solution independently. Evolution is not a coincidence machine. When you see the same behavior evolve across completely unrelated species, you're looking at something real. You're looking at a strategy the universe keeps selecting for because it keeps working. Take corvids. If you are not already mildly obsessed with corvids, ravens and jays and crows, I need you to get on that because these birds are doing things that should not be possible in a brain the size of a walnut. Western scrub jays, now called California scrub jays, have been studied in some detail by researchers including Nicola Clayton at Cambridge, and what they've found is genuinely startling. These birds cache food. They hide it, often in hundreds of different locations across a wide area, and they remember where most of it is. They don't just remember the location, they remember what they hid there and when they hid it. They factor in perishability. They will actually go back and move a cache if they think they were watched while hiding it, because they understand, on some level, that a competitor might steal it. These birds are running a mental inventory of their stored resources that would impress a small warehouse logistics team. Why does a jay need all of this? Because the food doesn't come evenly distributed across time. There are seasons of abundance and seasons of nothing, and the birds that survived long enough to pass on their genes were the ones who stored aggressively during abundance and retrieved carefully during scarcity. Keep everything. Remember where it is. Guard aggressively. Squirrels do this so compulsively that they sometimes forget their caches entirely, which is how a significant fraction of oak trees exist. Squirrels storing acorns they never came back for, inadvertently planting forests. Even their failures at this strategy contribute to the ecosystem. The collecting instinct runs so deep it overshoots its own purpose. And then there is the packrat. The North American packrat, genus Neotoma, builds structures called middens, enormous nests made of every object the animal can physically carry back to its den. Bones, sticks, cactus spines, metal scraps from modern environments, anything remotely useful, and several things that are absolutely not. Packrat middens have been found that are tens of thousands of years old, preserved under layers of crystallized urine, which is a sentence I did not expect to type today, but here we are. Some of these middens date back 50,000 years. The animal is collecting with such consistency and such volume that the record of its collecting outlasts glaciers. The point is not that squirrels and packrats and jays are doing what you do. The point is that the underlying logic, keep things, they might matter later. The cost of discarding is higher than the cost of keeping, has been selected for across such a wide range of unrelated species that it is basically a law of resource-limited environments. Your drawer full of dead batteries is the human instantiation of a principle that runs through tens of millions of years of animal evolution. But why does it feel so bad to throw things away? Not just inconvenient, actually bad, like a small internal protest, a low-grade resistance that makes you set the object down and decide you'll deal with it later. This is where some genuinely interesting cognitive science comes in, and to understand it, we have to talk about a pair of researchers whose work permanently changed how we think about human decision-making. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, working together through the 1970s and into the 1980s, documented something they called loss aversion. The finding that losses feel approximately twice as powerful as equivalent gains. Losing $20 hurts about as much as gaining $40 feels good. The pain of subtraction is not symmetric with the pleasure of addition. And this asymmetry, they argued, is not irrational. It is adaptive. Think about what this means in a scarcity environment. If gaining something and losing the same thing were equally weighted, you'd be relatively indifferent to both. But if losing something hurts twice as much as gaining it feels good, you become a very motivated keeper. The asymmetry is a bias toward preservation. And preservation in an environment where resources are genuinely finite and genuinely hard to replace is the correct operating mode. There's a related effect researchers call the endowment effect. Once you own something, you value it more highly than you would if you didn't own it. Classic experiments ask people how much they'd pay for a coffee mug, then give them the mug and ask how much they'd sell it for. The sell price is consistently and significantly higher than the buy price. Owning something changes what it's worth. This is not confusion. This is your brain encoding a replacement cost. In an environment without a store, replacing something you own requires effort and luck and time you might not have, so of course owned things are worth more than unowned things. And beneath all of this sits what researchers in behavioral ecology sometimes call the scarcity heuristic, a cognitive shortcut that treats resource availability as unreliable by default. When food availability is unpredictable, the adaptive response is to overcollect during abundance. Because the distribution of future scarcity is unknown. You don't know when the next hard time is coming. You don't know how long it will last. So you store more than you currently need, because the downside of storing too much is mild, and the downside of storing too little could be catastrophic. The rational expected value of keeping things, in that world, points clearly toward keeping things. What you feel when you pick up a dead battery and think but maybe is not irrationality. It is this ancient calculus, running precisely as designed, producing precisely the answer it was supposed to produce. Keep it. You don't know when you'll need it. Replacement is uncertain. The cost of discarding is higher than the cost of storing. The algorithm is correct. The environment it's evaluating is the problem. And the archaeological record suggests this wasn't just a cognitive tendency, it was an actual practiced behavior with deep roots. We have evidence of deliberate food caching and object storage going back at least 30,000 years in the archaeological record, possibly much longer. Sites across Eurasia show storage pits, sometimes quite sophisticated ones, used to preserve meat and plant foods across seasons. At sites in what is now Russia associated with mammoth hunters, researchers have found organized storage of animal bones and materials that suggest communities were managing resources across multi-month time horizons. This is not opportunistic hoarding. This is planned, organized, systematic preservation of materials against anticipated future need. The famous Ohalo II site on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, dating to around 23,000 years ago, shows evidence of intentional storage of plant foods. People were gathering and keeping seeds not because they were immediately hungry, but because they understood that the gap between now and the next harvest would need to be bridged by something. Archaeological anthropologist Brian Hayden has argued extensively that the capacity for systematic storage was one of the key cognitive and behavioral innovations that allowed certain human groups to build complexity. It's the foundation of the surplus economies that eventually produced settled villages and then everything that came after. And here's the thing about the Great Depression generation, the people who lived through genuine modern scarcity, that makes the evolutionary case even cleaner. Researchers studying what sociologists sometimes call Depression-era mentality have documented consistent, measurable differences in resource behavior between cohorts who experienced the Great Depression as children or young adults and those who didn't. The Depression generation kept things: butter wrappers, old string, jars, fabric scraps, clothes that hadn't fit in 30 years. Not because they were confused about whether they needed these things, but because they had lived through a period where not having something, anything, could matter in ways that were hard to predict. The scarcity heuristic, activated by real experienced scarcity, recalibrated their baseline toward keeping. The brain learned the lesson the environment taught it. Keep things. You do not know what is coming. Now, I want to be fair to the objection that is almost certainly forming in some of your minds right now, because it's a real one and it deserves genuine engagement. Hoarding disorder is a clinically recognized condition. It's in the DSM. It causes real suffering. There are people for whom the accumulation of objects becomes genuinely impairing. They cannot discard anything. Their living spaces become unsafe. Their relationships suffer. Their daily functioning breaks down. This is not nothing. And it would be both scientifically lazy and ethically questionable to wave a hand and say, "Ah yes, but evolutionary, so actually fine." That's a fair point. Hold on to it. We're going to come back to it because understanding the evolutionary roots of this behavior actually helps explain the disorder rather than excusing it. The spectrum matters. But here is where the story pivots, and this is the thing that once you see it, you cannot unsee. The behavior is not the problem. The behavior is, by every reasonable metric we have, an excellent and ancient adaptive response to a specific kind of environment. What happened? The thing that turned a survival advantage into a drawer full of soy sauce packets is that the environment changed faster than the brain could track, much faster, in a way that is almost comically abrupt when you zoom out to the timescale on which natural selection operates. For most of human evolutionary history, objects were rare and hard to replace. That is simply true. And then, in the course of roughly 200 years, which is, from an evolutionary standpoint, not even a rounding error, we built industrial manufacturing, global supply chains, mass production, and a distribution system capable of delivering a replacement for almost anything you own to your door within 48 hours for less than it costs to park your car. The environment shifted from genuine scarcity to genuine abundance, almost overnight by evolutionary standards. And your brain received no update. This is the mismatch. This is the entire thing. Your scarcity detection system, your loss aversion, your endowment effect, your "I might need this" heuristic. These are not malfunctions. They are features. Ancient, elegant, genuinely effective features, now running in an environment they were not built for, producing outputs that look, from the outside, like clutter. The agricultural revolution, which began roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, is the first major inflection point in this story. When humans shifted from mobile foraging to settled agriculture, a few things changed that are relevant here. First, they became capable of accumulating objects in ways that nomadic foragers simply couldn't. You can only keep what you can carry, which is a natural cap on accumulation. Once you're stationary, that cap disappears. Second, the volume of objects in daily life began to increase. Pottery, tools, stored food, building materials. The surface area for the accumulation instinct to express itself expanded dramatically. But the agricultural revolution was slow. Objects were still genuinely valuable and genuinely hard to replace. A ceramic pot took time and skill to produce. Iron tools were expensive. Fabric was labor-intensive. The scarcity logic still more or less applied. Keeping things still made sense in the world you were actually living in. The mismatch was beginning, but it was mild. The Industrial Revolution changed the calculation completely. Mass production dropped the replacement cost of almost every object in daily life by orders of magnitude. Things that previously required a craftsperson to make could now be manufactured by the thousands in a factory and shipped anywhere. Objects became cheap, replaceable, abundant in a way that would have seemed literally incomprehensible to any human who lived before about 1850. And the brain, running on hardware last significantly updated tens of thousands of years ago, never got the memo. The drawer of dead batteries is the gap between 1850 and 50,000 BC expressed in household junk. There's one dimension of this that I think often gets underappreciated in the usual discussion of hoarding, and it's a class dimension. The way this accumulation instinct expresses itself is not uniform across social positions. People with more financial resources, who actually live in a kind of material abundance that most of human history could not have imagined, are often the ones most celebrated for minimalism. The clean white apartment, the capsule wardrobe, the carefully curated shelf with 12 objects on it. This is aesthetic minimalism as a luxury good. It's something you can afford to do precisely because you have the resources to replace anything you get rid of. People with fewer economic resources, people who are actually closer to the scarcity conditions the brain evolved for, where replacement is genuinely uncertain, where throwing something away and then needing it later has real costs, tend to keep more things, and they are often pathologized for it. The cultural framing of clutter as a failure, of keeping things as low class, of minimalism as aspirational, maps very uncomfortably onto economic class lines. The brain is running the same ancient program in everyone. But the environments people inhabit vary enough that in some cases the program is still largely correct. Replacement is not trivially easy. Keeping things has genuine value, and in other cases the mismatch is near total. The same instinct that looks like sensible thriftiness in one context looks like dysfunction in another. Worth sitting with. And now we arrive at the actual payoff of this entire journey. This is the thing I want you to feel, not just understand. Your brain contains a system, and this is not a metaphor. This is a real cognitive and emotional system encoded in neural architecture that was built by 2 million years of human ancestors surviving conditions that would kill you or me in weeks. Every winter that was survived, every tool that was kept and mattered, every "I'll keep this, I might need it" instinct that paid off in some freezing, desperate moment contributed in some small way to the chain of survival that ends in you sitting here watching this video. The people who threw things away carelessly, who didn't feel the pull of preservation, who laughed at the "what if I need this" instinct. Some of them didn't make it through hard winters. Some of them didn't have enough. The keepers survived in disproportionate numbers, and they passed the keeping instinct along. And here you are, its current carrier, staring at a dead battery and feeling something ancient and insistent tell you not to let go. The mismatch is almost poignant when you see it clearly. You are a finely calibrated survival machine, dropped into a world of infinite abundance and next-day delivery, trying to run software that expects resources to be scarce and irreplaceable. Your junk drawer is not a failure of your character. It is the trace evidence of 2 million years of successful human survival, compressed into a kitchen cabinet. The distance between the ice age and your house is enormous. Your brain does not fully know that. And in some ways, that is the most human thing about you. Now, back to the clinical piece, because I promised we'd return to it, and it matters. Clinical hoarding disorder is real, and the evolutionary framing helps us understand why it exists without excusing its harms. The scarcity heuristic, like most cognitive systems, operates on a dial rather than a switch. At one end, you have the perfectly functional version. Mild accumulation, reluctance to discard things with obvious potential utility. A drawer of stuff that is charming rather than impairing. Most people reading this are somewhere in this range. At the other end, you have cases where the accumulation imperative has been dialed to maximum, where distress at discarding anything becomes so acute that it overrides other needs, where the volume of kept objects begins to interfere with daily life, where the ancient keep, just-in-case logic has been amplified far beyond functional. What's likely happening in clinical hoarding based on current research, including work by Randy Frost at Smith College, who has studied this extensively, is that several things compound. The baseline accumulation instinct is running high. the emotional valence of discarding is significantly amplified, and executive functioning, the system that helps us override impulses based on current rather than ancestral context, is reduced. The instinct is turned up and the override mechanism is turned down. That's not a character flaw. That's a specific configuration of a brain system that everyone has, pushed to a point where it causes suffering. Treatment that understands this, that works with the underlying mechanism rather than just shaming people for having things, tends to work better. The disorder is not separate from the instinct. It is the instinct at a volume the environment cannot handle. Understanding the evolutionary baseline doesn't eliminate the clinical reality, it contextualizes it. And contextualization, it turns out, is the beginning of compassion. Which brings us back to you, right now, and that drawer. You live in an environment that mass-produces objects at a scale your brain was never equipped to fully register. You are surrounded, constantly, by more stuff than any human in the history of our species has ever been surrounded by. Every surface, every shelf, every corner is a potential site for the keep it, you might need it algorithm to express itself. The trigger that once helped you survive a winter now fires every time you consider throwing away an instruction manual for an appliance you no longer own. The ancient signal and the modern abundance are having an argument inside your hippocampus, and the ancient signal was built for much harder conditions than these, and it is not going to lose easily. When you close that drawer without sorting it, you are not failing. You are feeling the weight of a survival instinct that is older than agriculture, older than writing, older than the wheel. It is a real thing, pressing on you from the inside, doing its job. The ice is long gone. The winter it was prepared for ended 10,000 years ago. And somewhere in your kitchen, next to a packet of soy sauce from a restaurant that has since closed, the algorithm is still running. Maybe that's okay. Before you go, I genuinely want to know, what is the one object in your home that you have held onto for years that serves absolutely no function, that you know you will never use, and that you cannot bring yourself to throw away? Leave it in the comments. No judgment. I suspect the range of answers is going to be spectacular. If this kind of thing is what you're into, if you want to keep understanding why the brain and body you're walking around in were built for a world that doesn't exist anymore, subscribe. We've got a lot more of this coming, and some of it is significantly weirder than dead batteries.